Maurice. Maurice, take it away.
Thank you, Darren. So once again, my name is Maurice Cottman. I'm the director for the Student Center for Diversity and Inclusion. So unlike a lot of professors, I'm going to ask you to pull your phone out if you have one on you. And please, as you see at the top of the screen, please go to menti.com and please put in the code that you see. The cool thing about what we're going to do today is everything that you will see me present, you will also be able to see it on your phone, but there's going to be certain segments of what we're talking about where I want you to actually write something on the screen. Don't worry, Dr. Carey, I promise that I'm censoring this in 19 different languages, so we should be good to show it off. So if you would please enter menti.com, enter the code. You can use a tablet, you can use your laptop, and you can use your cell phone. So we'll wait for people to do that. And while people are doing that, I just want to make a little bit of a statement before we start. And I want to kind of paraphrase Lorraine Hansberry and say that for today, for this conversation, don't be a liberal, don't be a moderate, and don't be a conservative. Be an American radical. We're going to talk about a little bit of some radical things today. Nothing too over the edge, but think about it from this phrase of inclusion and why we may or may not be able to attain it. So I'm going to give everybody about 30 more seconds to join the conversation via Menti. So sometimes the recognition of diversity creates a system of anti-inclusion. We're going to talk about it a little bit deeper about how it does it. Number two, politics can force one group to adhere to whomever is dominant. Once again, politics can force one group to adhere to whomever is dominant. And three is 1 + 2. See what I did there, people? While also reinforcing negative stereotypes. So if you take the first and the second points, those two ring true, especially when we're reinforcing negative stereotypes. So when we look at Drexel, when we look at America, I like to say Drexel's a microcosm of America. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of Drexel, I'm gonna give you a little bit of America, and hopefully I can blend them in together so that you can get a more holistic view of the things that we're talking about. So this is the time. I need you all. Break out your phone and whatever device you're doing. As you can see, what makes you diverse? You're gonna see your answers pop up on screen, and it should make some pretty cool word art if we get enough responses. So I'm gonna give everybody about 60 seconds, 60 to 90 seconds to please answer what makes you diverse. Here we go, pretty, different accents, smart, tall, my background. I feel like I can adhere to all of these except I'm not tall. We have interracial couple. We have gender, hometown, religion, sexuality, female, family heritage, artist identity. Let's go, people. Oh, it's looking beautiful. It's looking beautiful. Humor, cultural perspective, rural upbringing. So these are some great ones. LGBTQ. Let me ask anybody. Would anybody like to unmute and say anything related to either what you put on the screen or what somebody else put on the screen? And we keep them coming in. Body type, uniqueness, parent, adopted, SES. Okay. Would anybody like to speak to their own diversity or another piece of diversity that you see on the screen?
Maurice, this is Dr. Carey. Can you go back to how you defined diverse in the first slide?
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Carey. So for this specific training we're defining diversity as the recognition of difference.
Okay. So I think that parallels to what you're seeing here in terms of how persons are seeing themselves as being different and in what aspects are they seeing themselves as being different. Of course, I wrote tall.
Was that a jab at me?
Not at all.
I like to say I'm average rapper height. So most of the rappers people care about are my height or shorter. But I agree with you. I think that, I think often we think of diversity as check, 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 which is a little bit of a foreshadow. We're going to talk about that. But I like to allow people to recognize who they are in relation to spaces and who the people are around them so that you can get to understand them a little bit. And it's so funny, every time we do this word art, I never know how it's going to come out. But I think that this is a great one because typically people I don't think I see anything that is exactly the same at all. You know, everybody dug a little bit deep instead of going on the surface. So thank you all for that. So before we continue, these are what are considered the diversity stats for Drexel University. And I wanted to really highlight this because I think statistics is often how we define diversity. You know, I would love to highlight the fact that our institution is 48% white, but I'm not even sure if that is an accurate statistic because if you look on here, 3% is race or ethnicity unknown, 12% is international, which could come from a plethora of places. And then you also have different people who are mixed race. So even though 48% is very high, that number could be even higher. So that means that the ideologies that Drexel are working on may be specifically from a white lens, may not be intentional, but it may actually be coming from that. This is a snapshot of who attends Drexel and a breakdown of who is actually here, but it doesn't necessarily speak to if people feel like they're included here. I think that that's something that we're going to experience and go through a little bit today because in the work that I do, I constantly see people come through the door and then I see Drexel kind of take their hands off and like, good luck, find the resources if you need it. And for me, I like to try to bring a little bit of a human side to the work that I do. So the next slide, I actually reached out to a student and yes, hopefully you appreciate my gift here. And we started talking about having a seat at the table, Solange voice. And often a seat at the table is looked at as the be all end all, like we solved it, look, you're here. But for me, I don't know what's worse, getting invited to the party and ignored or never getting an invite at all. So when I speak to my students and I speak to people outside of Drexel, I always ask them, what did you eat? And they say, what do you mean? I say, well, if you got a seat at the table, what did you eat? And they look at me like I'm crazy because they don't always think about it as, oh, there's another step. For me, the seat at the table was just the beginning. So I asked this specific Drexel student, do you think Drexel overall has tried to be as inclusive for you as possible in your entire time here? Once again, I asked this Drexel student, do you think Drexel has overall tried to be as inclusive for you as possible in your entire time here? This is what they said. Overall, no. I still feel like on a personal level, I'm an outsider trying to fit into a club, and that any seat I've been given has been for show or lip service. I do, however, feel like I've had a much better experience here than some of my peers, but it feels more like a luck of the draw than anything Drexel has specifically done. This is a current Black Drexel student, and also not just a run-of-the-mill Drexel student. This person is a student leader in most organizations. They are an honor student here. They have made the dean's list. This student is somebody who is not looking to be on the fringes, but yet they still feel like it. And it's interesting to me too, because even though they feel like they're still operating out on the fringes, they make it a point to me that their experience is still that much greater than some of their peers. The bar is so low sometimes that for me, it feels like it's virtually on the floor. So if we are really going to experience and talk about inclusion on a level that we might not always think about it, the first question I have to pose is, why? Why is it that a person who is looking to be included, and our statistics say that they are here and that we are a diverse school in many different ways, why is it that they do not feel included? First things first, those check marks that we talked about earlier. If we look at D&I as everyone else's job, especially if it does not have an attachment to our actual title, then the inclusion aspect never gets examined. I think Drexel is one of those places, just like a lot of other higher ed institutions, where the check marks are usually the baseline. Okay, we did this. Do we have white people, Black people, Asian people, Indian people? Check, 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 check. Do we have straight people, gay people, non-binary people, trans people? Check, check, check. Check marks only go so far. if you don't actually impose action beyond the check mark is only that. It's only the first step of trying to make sure that the right people are at that said table. Are we being reactive or proactive? Speaking to being reactive, I believe that the majority of society is reactive. Think about it like this. Last year, 2020, when people were peacefully protesting in the streets about Black Lives Matter or about the murder of several Black people, the message was there and people heard it. But think about how much larger it was amplified when things started burning and things started being looted, even if those were not the same people who were protesting in the street. Too often in higher education, that's how we act. We wait till things are on fire before we actually get to the root cause of the issue. I always knock on wood when I say this next point, but if you know that students or staff members or faculty members are dealing with poor mental health and we aren't doing anything to step up to help deliver and bring them out of that, the only time that we make a universal change is when somebody harms themselves. We have to get in front of the fight instead of always trying to trail it. And when you think about the political aspect of it, it goes deeper than just what we think. It's about what we do. I like to put this picture on camera because for me, when I first started here at Drexel, and still to this day, red tape is almost everybody's favorite phrase. There's like, I'm tired, I don't have enough time, I need caffeine, and then red tape. So when I see red tape, I like to say, I treat red tape like a stop sign instead of a red light. So a stop sign, you pull up, you're supposed to stop. I know everybody isn't doing it, but you pull up, you stop, you look around, and then you proceed. At a red light, you're waiting to be told when to go. We have to look past stopping and look at red tape as a slowing down process. We can get through the red tape if we learn to navigate a little bit better. And being able to navigate a little bit better is to look around, find what the problem is, figure out the right resources, and continue to move forward. Red tape has been used as an excuse to only facilitate the optics of what situations are. Think about it as stakeholders versus the common person. What is legal as opposed to what is equitable. Doing the minimum versus doing the most. And as you sit here, you have to think to yourself, in which class am I in? And as you think about that, pull out those phones again, beautiful people, or whatever you're using to follow me on Menti. Also, if there's anything that you want to screenshot, you can do that if you're using your phone. But so what does inclusion mean to you? I'm gonna give everybody a couple of minutes to put it up. Please try to use a complete thought if you can, because I'm going to read them out if they hit the screen. So in your personal estimation, what does inclusion mean to you? No one is left out. Decentering whiteness. Considering the barriers for people to be engaged and involved. Actions to address inequities. Feeling accepted without any explanation. Everyone feels like part of the group. Participation, a sense of belonging. Being accessible, approachable without making people divulge every aspect of their identity. Everyone has an equal voice. Not only being allowed to be in a space, but being encouraged and rewarded for being there. People are actively appreciated and diversity is explicitly valued. Where every voice counts the same and is heard the same without judgment, creating equal opportunities for people of all colors, backgrounds, and SES. All persons, thoughts, and ideas are honored and heard. Everyone is included. No one is excluded. Being included. Thank you all for putting these things out there. One of the things that I love about using Menti is that I actually get to see what you're thinking and we can kind of speak to a lot of the things that are on the screen. Another one just came in. Not just including, but purposely raising voices, usually unheard. So I'm finding a lot of connectiveness. Would anybody like to speak to the idea of amplifying voices? I feel like that is a common thread in a lot of these posts. Would anybody like to just speak out about the idea of amplifying voices?
Maurice, hi, this is Michelle Radigan. One of the things that I'm thinking about is, as a white person, it's really important for me to be mindful of when to speak up on behalf to support and lift up, and when to be quiet. So a part of, the being heard is me navigating my own white self in those spaces.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your transparency. And I'll also add to that. And I'm assuming, you know what they say about assuming, but I'm assuming that as you are listening and taking in, that you're also educating yourself, so that when the time does come and you feel like it is your place to speak or add to the conversation, that you can add so in a way that is equitable for everybody involved. Thank you for speaking up, Michelle. Would anybody else like to speak to the idea of amplifying voices?
Yeah, Maurice, go ahead. Someone else?
No, go ahead, Stephanie.
All right. So I feel like if people grow up in an environment where they are told that, or where they experience that their opinion matters less, or their achievement matters less, or is of lower value than everybody else, then I think it is our responsibility to not only encourage, but amplify, as in raise and encourage people to share their opinions. Because I'm thinking about a group of people that is mixed, but half of them feel like what they have to say is not valid, or there are a lot of people there who have all these important things to say, and they think that their own opinion or their own take on things doesn't matter as much, so they don't speak up. And I think it's our responsibility to make sure that those opinions and thoughts and desires and drive are included in the conversation, because I think that enriches the whole community.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. And something that caught my ear that I'll also like to speak to, the inverse of that is true as well. You know, when we ostracize people because we think that we are congratulating them for doing something that is expected from other cultures and other communities, like the amount of times that I've been given a high five for not ever going to prison and going to college is insane. Like, it's like, oh, I thought that's what we're supposed to do. But that has really been my existence as well. So we have time for one more. Does it one more person want to share about amplifying voices?
Yes, let me just show my video. Hi, I wanted to comment on, I'm just looking at everything, and I'm really, just really learning and just reading everything. I wrote being included, but also like the other response, not just being included, but also being heard. And I was sitting here thinking, I was saying, and that often happens, and I'm thinking, and just using myself as an example, you may be included, and then when you speak and you voice your opinion, and I'm thinking, you know, as you voice your opinion, you wonder, are they hearing me, or are they just ignoring you? So you kind of like, and actually, I just want to say it's happened to me, and I wonder, because I've been a person that always spoke up, and especially when we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion. And then you realize, and I'm realizing here in academia, when you, okay, I spoke up, and I'm waiting for feedback. But then I'm like, did they really hear me? And you don't really get a response. So, I'm looking at everything here, but I'm actually looking at this and really trying to analyze, okay, what should you do next? And for me, I just keep talking and I'll say, somebody's going to hear me.
Love it. Love it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that that's important because I think there's a difference between listening and hearing. Are you actively listening to somebody or are you just hearing the fact that they're talking? And when people, that's actually a great segue too, Denise, when people are not heard, certain things come into action and certain things have to be about change. So JFK once said, change is the law of life. And those who look only to the past and present are certain to miss the future. So when I see this quote, to me, it's not about ignoring where we've come from or ignoring where we are, but it's about making decisions for the future based upon who we were, who we are, or who we're trying to be. And in order for real change to happen, no one is above the law, as fake Kamala Harris might say. So we all have to look at ourselves in the mirror and think about being able to change, but also think about everybody else who could change as well. And ways to change in America have been through civil rights. So there are 9 civil rights acts in the history of America. Policy dictates procedure. Let me say that again. Policy dictates procedure. What was created for one period of time has to evolve to meet the demands of people today. So I'm not going to go through all 9 of the Civil Rights Acts. You should read them on your spare time. I promise you, you will not be bored because it'll tell you where we were as America and where we were allegedly supposed to go. But the first one and only one that I'm going to pull up is the first Civil Rights Act of 1866. It states, extending the rights of emancipated slaves by stating that any person born in the United States, regardless of race, is a US citizen. So on the surface, this is diversity, recognizing that, there are people in this country who aren't treated like Americans. What can we do to prove that we notice them? Diversity, right? Acknowledgement of difference. The Civil Rights Act of 1866. So allegedly, once the chains of slavery was washed away from us, we are now looked more like American citizens. But where inclusion became political, if we can't keep them in the chains of slavery, we put them in the chains of prison, the brand new slavery. So you see how even though, yes, that is Kendrick Lamar, by the way, even though one thing is created in order to show diversity and acknowledge that difference, inclusion is looked at in the inverse, and they don't want certain people to be actually part of society, even if law is supposed to dictate that they are. So when policing happened at a high level, we, with different movements in the 60s and the 50s, like the Black Panthers, as you see here, created a system to police the police to make sure that our rights were being justifiably not obstructed. And when we police the police, politicians created a system in DC, as you also see here, to dismantle these groups and eliminate said threats. And the man who was in charge of this, so I had to do J. Edgar Hoover, not only because Judas and the Black Messiah, but because the things that we relate to, I want to remind people that what was happening in the 50s and the 60s was not that far away. And what was happening then still has direct consequences what's happening now. So the former director of the FBI said, prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant Black nationalist movement. Malcolm X might have been such a messiah. Martin Luther King, Stokely Carmichael, and Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad all aspire to this position. So whether you agree with what these leaders were trying to accomplish in their time, 2 words that you gotta keep in mind and hold higher than everything else is prevent and messiah. The definition of a messiah is a leader or savior of a particular group or cause. So even if all of these leaders were not militant, politically speaking, We got to dismantle these groups because a Messiah is a leader or a savior of a particular group or cause. When we talk about J. Edgar Hoover, you got to go into COINTELPRO, an FBI program created to infiltrate, disrupt, discredit, or eliminate activist groups and their leaders. Let me read that again. An FBI program created to infiltrate, disrupt, and discredit or eliminate activist groups and their leaders. So it wasn't good enough to break apart the group. They had to wash away the progress that was possibly made by said group. Unity is a top fear for those who need us divided. Too often, people who hold the power fear inclusion because it threatens the normalcy, even if it is a favorable outcome for some. It's not a coincidence that the loudest voices tend to get quieted. Redlining. I promise this is not going to be an economic course, but there's two things to think about with redlining as it relates to what I'm saying about political inclusion. So not only were people of color, specifically Black people, not allowed to purchase houses in specific areas or get loans as it relates to purchasing specific homes, but when they sold their own homes and land and property, they were getting pennies on the dollar as it compares to their white counterparts. And when you cut off the access to generational wealth, or even if you want to play devil's advocate, a little bit more pocket change, when disaster tends to strike, it's hard to recuperate. So CNBC says more than half of students probably can't afford college due to COVID-19. I would challenge that to say how many students was just holding on by a thread. See, when you systematically are held back, when atrocities happen, whether they be your fault or otherwise, it's hard for you to maintain and push through. The political figures in our lives could have protected our people at a higher level. So instead of giving bailouts to multi-million-dollar companies, we could have bailed out some college students on a higher level. We could have helped people who have debt because of the higher education system. So more than 56% of college students say that they can no longer afford their tuition tab. According to a survey by One Class, which polled more than 10,000 current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors from 200 plus colleges and universities across the country, just about half of all undergraduates said they need to figure out a new way to pay for school because of the impact of the pandemic on their financial standing, the report found. Now, think about what I just read, but also realize all of the students who come to a university like ours every single year who can't afford it and don't realize it quite yet. Think about the first generation students. Think about the people who are filing as independents alone. Think about the single parents. Think about the adult students. Think about all of the students who live on the fringes and can't figure out a way to just get towards the middle because of life circumstances. And then throw on top of that something like a pandemic. And if things were handled better politically, I believe, we would be in a far better place economically, morally, and health-wise. Which brings me to my next point. I firmly am in the camp that where you put your money is where you put your morals. Where you put your money is where you put your morals. So when you think about money, cash rules everything around me. That's what America's about. No matter what we say into the public, money is how we operate, how we get from point A to point B. And the way that the political system chose to put the money when the pandemic was happening shows you who they value and who they do not. Who is still a have-not and who is a have. Who is making money during the pandemic and who cannot find the money. You have to look deeper than what's on the surface to realize how structures directly impact if people can find the inclusion that we're talking about, or will they forever be excluded? So when we think about inclusion, one of the hot button topics that I've come across, not only last year and this year, but for quite a few years, is should we get rid of things like Black History Month? And my retort would be, not quite yet. Yes, in theory, we hope that we won't need a Black History Month because Black history will be taught every single month. But we're not there yet. There's a lack of appreciation for culture, specifically minoritized culture. If we don't preserve it, we lose it to appropriation and sanitization. So as soon as we let go of who we are, and we hope that the majority can control it and articulate it in the same way that we would, we kind of let go of the power as it relates to who we are. We need things like the Soul Train Awards if you're Black. We need things like BET if you're Black. We need things like Black History Month, because when we aren't put on the same pedestals as our counterparts who are in the majority, and typically those are white people, we will never, historically speaking, be deemed as equal because history is written by the majority. History is written by the winners. And systematically, we have been shown that we are not the winners. So things like Black History Month, Black History museums, things like these need to be staples until we realize that there's more of an intersectional balance at play. But it's up to us to push that narrative, to try to figure out ways in which we can continue the conversation way beyond those check marks. Because I don't know how you feel about it, but every year like clockwork, around January 27th, maybe 26th, I get emails and calls about what's happening in Black History Month as if February snuck up on people. So there's already a lack of appreciation for the shortest month of the year. So what do you think will happen if we relinquish that as well? So what can we do to offset the anti-inclusion focus and practices of a lot of political figures, a lot of lawmakers, a lot of political rhetoric? Community building. Community building gives us the opportunity to show the intersectionality, show how we're much more alike than different, but also hold up higher who we are in our own identities and ethnicities. It gives people a purpose. Communities can save lives. And when it's done correctly, it can unify people from different walks of life. There are several places around the university, at Drexel specifically, where we are doing that and trying to do more of it. The Student Center for Diversity and Inclusion, yeah, had to give myself a plug. That's what we all about. We're about bringing people who are living on those fringes and working directly for them. One example that I always use about the SCDI, think of it like a building. As we're erecting a building, we're putting in ramps, no stairs. So theoretically, anybody who can walk upstairs can also walk up the ramp. And anybody who can't walk upstairs, theoretically can still go up the ramp. It's working margins to center. The majority of people tend to work center and maybe go out to the margins. But when you're in the center, you're missing so many different people because all they have is a seat at the table. They don't actually have a meal. The Center for Black Culture, a new area that has opened up here. First floor Rush building. They are also trying to do those things. But in each individual educational department and professional department, we need to be pushing that narrative. Whenever I'm in a meeting and I hear people talking about our Black students or our Latinx students or our Asian students and saying, what can we do? I'm one of those people that raise my hand and be like, well, what about the Black faculty and staff? What about the Latinx Black faculty and staff? What about the Asian faculty and staff? In congruence with the students, what are we doing for everybody? Because I don't know about anybody here on this call, I can't really see everybody, but I firmly believe that students specifically are looking for people they can verbally and visually identify with. And when they find those people, they're going to latch on to it. But if we aren't even protecting those specific groups of people, it just all is going to fold. It's that optics thing again. It looks good on paper, but the practice isn't truly there. Also, this is why things like the Anti-Racism Task Force is important. No matter what you might think of what's happening with the Anti-Racism Task Force or what you may not know, we got to remember that something like the Anti-Racism Task Force is greater than what the optics usually show us. And we have to take advantage of it. Because when we think about the optics, it's all surface level until you dig a little bit deeper and realize that it's not really meant for anything. With the Anti-Racism Task Force here at Drexel, we have an opportunity to change policy. And remember, policy dictates perseverance. If you don't change a policy, things just typically go in a circle. Because as I showed you a little bit earlier, even if things are written into law or things are ground rules, there's always a system working to circumvent that and try to make sure that that inclusion aspect doesn't happen. Because we all know what diversity is now, but we can't pretend that diversity automatically brings upon a sense of inclusion, because it doesn't. Sometimes, and far too often, hopefully as I articulated here, as soon as somebody recognizes difference, they're trying to figure out a way to get away from that difference, or they're trying to figure out a way to submiss that difference. We have to actively fight to uplift the voiceless. We have to look around and see, are our practices, our procedures, the things that we are putting into power good for everybody or just good for some people? And as we continue to grow as a Drexel community, I hope we can do that. Because like I said earlier, Drexel is a microcosm of America. What's happening in our classrooms are happening out in the streets. But if we come together as a community, we can possibly change what happens in our classrooms, and then that may actually dictate what happens in our streets. So that's all I have for you. I left some time for us to have some questions. You can type them in if you would like. They'll pop up on the screen, so please be careful what you say. Or if you want, you can definitely unmute, and any questions, comments, anything that we would like to talk about. We have about 15-ish minutes. I would say I wanted to leave enough time for people to articulate their viewpoints.
Okay, I'll start. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Carey. So I am the chair of the Board of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at CNHP. So if anyone's not from CNHP, welcome. It's great to see our board members here supporting this presentation today. And of course, Maurice, you got me writing copious stuff again, right? So I'm just going to put that out there. But I want to go back to the point where Stephanie was literally celebrating in her Hollywood Square. We had a great ally conversation the other day, and I'm going to put it out there as an ally conversation, Stephanie, where I had literally said to her, a lot of people of color are really tired of those documentaries pulling that one student at a inner city Detroit who is all of a sudden becoming this great scholar, and then you literally said, I'm always celebrated for being the one that didn't go to jail or whatever, as if that's not typical or that's not the expectation. Can you speak a little bit more to that, Maurice? Because I think that Stephanie hearing that 2 days in a row had to be kind of a shocker for her. But I think that people need to understand it's not celebratory when we see those kinds of things. We are rearing our children to do the exact same thing. But when they isolate one person and put them up there as the pedestal person, then it's kind of like, so I just want to get as a matter of fact, I want to get your male point of view as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Carey. So I think the first point about that is, even if somebody doesn't realize that that's a microaggression, it's direct, because in somebody's mind, they already have a bias or a belief about me. So when I break that down and I let them know how well I'm doing, even though it's normal to everybody else, they're like, what? I got to tell you about this. I got to tell you how great that is. And it happens very often. I know specifically in my Black community, it happens quite often. Even people who might become part of a negative statistic, as soon as they circumvent that even just a little bit, it's celebrated as if that person isn't living their life to the same standards as another person. It can be very, very ostracizing. I think a lot of people think that they are actually lifting people up when they say and do those types of things, when in all actuality, all you're doing is putting a bullseye on that person, because you're not allowing them to be normal. They have to be extraordinary. So even if they slip off that podium, which happens as well, we also get drugged a lot deeper than a lot of other people. And I think even as a male, it's interesting because I know for me that when I care about things that Black men are allegedly not supposed to care about, people kind of get the ooey gooey eyes like, oh, what? Mental health? You're talking about these things? Oh, wait, you care about what's happening with women out here? Oh, wait. So you telling me that being faithful is like, it's all of these things that gets hyper masculine conversations because I'm supposed to be this Black man. And I think Black men specifically are not looked at as any other men. You know, science has proven to us that Black people, especially Black men, usually get, let's say, categorized as older than we actually are. We get categorized as more aggressive than we actually are. It's almost like we're not human. It's almost like we don't actually have a heart until somebody might be begging for their actual life. So I think as a man, not only as a man do I get categorized, but a Black man specifically. Somebody put a question in. Can you please distinguish equality from equity? Okay, so for me, when I hear equality and equity, I think equality is something that is what everybody kind of goes with because it's what's been said for so long. It's the equal, you know, everybody gets the exact same thing. No matter where you start off at life, no matter where you're going to end up, everybody gets the exact same thing. The problem with that is that since everybody doesn't start at the same point in the race, what you're giving me may not actually help me get as far as I need to get to that finish line. Whereas one of my counterparts might have started way in front of me, but they're also getting the same exact resource. Equity is meeting people exactly where they are. It's giving people all of the tools that they need to finish their race. So if, let's say, Dr. Carey and I, we come from the same neighborhood, but I have one parent and she has two, right? So if we're applying to the same schools, the income that's coming into my household might be drastically different than the income that's coming into her household because I have one parent as opposed to two. But if you're going to say, well, everybody gets the same thing, then that scholarship is going to get split in a way that may not actually be fair to somebody like me because I'm coming to the race a little bit behind. But if you looked at what was going on and you saw like, oh, your grades are the same, you all have the same type of extracurriculars, but your household has far less income, we're going to give you a little bit more money because obviously that's the equitable thing to do. I think that we as D&I people hear equality so much that it becomes just like a numb feeling. It's like, oh yeah, everybody get equal. But when you do something, when you say everybody gets everything equal off the rip, boom, that takes away from all of the years that led to that point where that person was not getting what they deserved. You know, so if a person finally gets what their colleague is getting, what about all of those years when they actually didn't get what their colleague was getting? Are we going to make up for those years? And that's what equity to me really means. Boom, Mark this answer. All right. So what are your thoughts on All Lives Matter? More inclusive or more exclusive? Nice. So All Lives Matter. One of the reasons why All Lives Matter is such an issue is because it was created in direct opposition to Black Lives Matter. It wasn't there first. You know, it's not like Black Lives Matter bit the sauce of All Lives Matter. It was like, well, what about Black Lives? Black Lives Matter was a thing first, and then people retorted and said All Lives Matter, as if Black Lives Matter said only Black Lives Matter, or Black Lives Matter more. The phrase is Black Lives Matter, but I think it's missing a word. I think two should be punched onto Black Lives Matter, because systematically and historically, it has been proven that Black bodies don't matter. It's been proven that our lives don't mean as much as everybody else. Earlier, when I was talking about the 50s and the 60s and the 70s about the civil rights movement, think about all of the people who were killed during the civil rights movement and how America went on with their days. You know, like one thing that always sticks out to me, like I love Malcolm X, and I remember watching a documentary Who Killed Malcolm X on Netflix. It's an amazing documentary. Watch it if you haven't seen it. I think it's 3 or 4 parts. And they talked about when he was assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom. That same night, they moved his body, they moved the podium he was standing at, they put it in the basement, and then they had a dance recital. That same night. That shows how there is such a lack of appreciation for us as people. So when people say all lives matter, Black people probably say duh, but historically it's been shown that our lives don't matter as much as other people's lives. So it is 100% more exclusive because we are taking the focus off the actual issues and trying to redirect it into something that is already understood and agreed upon outside of Black lives. And if you think about it even a little bit deeper, this is what happened with people like Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling during football games. And he said it's to bring light to police brutality. People are being killed and beaten in the streets and nothing's happening. And then you know what they said? He's anti-American, he's anti-military. Look, he doesn't care about freedom and patriotism. And he's like, hold on. I didn't say any of that. I literally said it's for police brutality. And then they changed it to everything else. And then they basically called that person a terrorist. And then when people like Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers, white quarterbacks, say, we stand for the flag, we respect the flag, they say they're patriots and that they are is deeper than sports. Even though kneeling is the most respectful thing you can do. And then you fast forward that to what happened at the Capitol building, and people are beating cops with American flags. Probably the same type of people who told Colin Kaepernick to stand up. You can see the hypocrisy there.
And before you move on to the next question, I'm going to give you your credit because I have quoted you 4 or 5 times in presentations that I've done after you said this. And I told it to you the day you said it. You said Black Lives Matter is about race, Blue Lives Matter is about occupation. Boom, there you go. I've quoted you so many times, Maurice Cottman.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So
Wow.
if you guys hadn't heard, so you want to expand a little bit on that since we're talking about all lives and Black lives? Why you thought it was important to say Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives is about, well, Black Lives is about race, Blue Lives is about occupation.
Yeah, so I'll go into that quickly. That could be a whole Tuesday topic, but quickly speaking to it is, when people say Blue Lives Matter, they're using that as a bullying technique. They're using that as a means to overlook the wrong that is happening. Think about this. Police officers, unlike most occupations, get the benefit of the doubt no matter what. They get the benefit of the doubt. So off the rip, police officers' benefit of the doubt is here. Regular civilians is probably somewhere down here. So when we bypass, when police officers do things that are tragic and wrong, we are allowing them to get a pass that is even greater than you might even realize. And on top of that, when people say Blue Lives Matter, is usually used as a way to silence what is actually happening, especially to people who didn't deserve to be brutalized, murdered, and maimed. And Blue Lives Matter is one of those things too that people once again used in direct opposition to Black Lives Matter. Like, you know, when they say, you know, a person had a bad day or they're just a bad apple, I personally believe that there are certain professions where that excuse can't just be, oh, that's just the way it is. Like if we were getting on a plane and you said, you know, my pilot, it's pretty good, but he's having a bad day, we might make it. You will hop off that plane. Just the way that if you saw a cop pull up and he's like, well, he's having a bad day, he may or may not shoot this person. You would say, don't pull him over. Like, no, go home, get some therapy, see what we're going to do. But I think that it also, once again, shows that it's not about the actual issues. It's about the optics of the issues. It's that red tape. Because if you believe in policing, right? If you actually believe in policing, now they're telling you, you either care about Black lives or you care about cops. And look how quickly the conversation shifts. So why did you think this topic was imperative today? So one of the reasons why I thought to speak to this specific topic was because I think people don't understand just how systematic and how deeply ingrained what is happening with the exclusion of people is. I think people believe that as a country, we're a lot more moral than we actually are, without remembering that morality is on the eye of the beholder. You know, like I like to say that the system is working the way it was intended. The system isn't broken. We need to change the system. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, I think Drexel's a microcosm of America. So if these are the problems I'm seeing in America, then these are definitely some of the problems that I'm seeing at Drexel. And I think that people, there's a lot of misunderstood information out there. Let's put it like that. Some people may say fake news. I'll say misunderstood information. I think that people are so quick to say that's a conspiracy theory or write it off because it seems so ludicrous. Like, that can't be the case. This could not be what it is. Until you actually look at the facts of it and you see the J. Edgar Hoovers, you see the CIA, you see the FBI, you see that whenever people have gotten out of line, when they talked about civil rights and bringing people together, I like to remind people that MLK wasn't assassinated because he was a Black leader only. He was assassinated more than likely because he was bringing together poor people of all colors. He's like, we gotta get him up out of here. Can't do that. That's that inclusion aspect. So the type of paranoia that I live with as a Black person in America every single day, I wanted to try to express why that paranoia is there, not only at a place like Drexel, where Black students, Black faculty, and Black staff are supposed to call home, but also when they leave Drexel, what they have to deal with. What do you think about the diversity journey being just a popular phase that will fade soon? Many are not motivated to take action because of this belief. Racism didn't start last year. This is an amazing question and comment. I like to challenge people whenever they tell me they care about me. If I don't really know them that well, like sometimes I say things and I act like my job security is untouchable. But I remember when last year specifically, my supervisor came to me and was like, I care about you. Is anything I can do? Like, what's going, like all of that kind of stuff. And I simply asked, why? Like, why do you care now? This isn't the first time we've seen people killed on film, especially by the hands of the police officers. This isn't the first time there's been uprising in the streets, but why now? And to her credit, she looked at me and said, I don't know. I've never been asked that question. So I like to push back on people and say, why? And then the second thing I like to do is ask people, what are they doing when nobody's looking? You know, posting on social media is cute, you know, but that's only the first step of acknowledging that there's an issue. What are you doing when you put the phone down? You know, if you're bringing it up in meetings, are you doing it because it's front page news, or are you doing it because you truly care about these issues? And I also like to say in diversity and inclusion, if you've come to the point where you can't find anybody to help, you are at the point where you're no longer doing your job. So I think that the idea that the journey is present, and I notice it, I'm pretty sure Dr. Carey noticed, I'm pretty sure a lot of people who do D&I work every day notice, we see the extra sauce people are putting in their signatures and their emails, like, oh, I got 17 completed diversity and inclusion courses. I'm like, oh, word? What was this last year? You know, or I see people who are saying, you know, I'm an expert in this, and it's like, oh, really? I've never seen you pop up at anything. You know, so people come out of the woodwork when things are front page news. But I like to push back and say, what are you doing when it's no longer in the papers? Because these issues are same issues, just remixed, as I like to say. Police brutality has happened since police began in the South. Their first couple jobs were to protect property, which were slaves, catch slaves if they ran away, and squash a rebellion if they thought it was going to happen. So since the very beginning of policing, at least in the South, there's been a dubious relationship with Black bodies. These are not new issues, but they're new to certain people. So I don't want to exclude them from the conversation. I want to bring them into the conversation, but let them realize that this is a lifelong conversation. This isn't a today conversation. And workshops like this are supposed to be continuous as opposed to one at a time. What do you think is the best way to be an ally without seeming performative? Oof, I think before anybody can be an ally for somebody else, they have to understand and realize that that's not a title that they can claim. That's a title that's bestowed upon them. So in order to actually attain that title, you have to know who or what the community is about and be amongst that community. I don't think people can be an ally from afar the way that we pretend we are. You know, I also don't think that somebody can study something for a certain amount of years and think that they know the experience because they read about it. I think being an ally is gaining that trust. Once you have that trust, then you may be allowed to be an ally. Everything besides that can look performative because if there's no trust, then there's nothing there. And if there's no trust, then you may never actually be able to do anything good in society. So that trust aspect is important so that it doesn't seem performative. But on the flip side of that coin, you have to be okay with being called out, because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. That's Fannie Lou Hamer, if you didn't know. And if people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, sometimes it's not as sunshine and rainbows when people are trying to infiltrate community. You know, I spoke to it earlier. Not saying that whoever wrote this question is part of the FBI, but our communities have been infiltrated for generations. So we have to be a lot more protective now, because when we were all open for everybody, we got destroyed. So there's automatically a wall up, especially if somebody doesn't know you. So we have 3 minutes. I'm trying to get to the rest. What is one first step for Drexel to take to move us forward if you had your wish? Acknowledge how we have failed. I think that the fact that Drexel always moves forward, and just tries not to look behind them is crazy to me. Like, I think that we got to really stand up and be like, we didn't do this when we should have. We didn't help this community when we could have. We didn't put resources here. Instead, we put resources there. Like, really look ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge our scars. Because if we don't acknowledge our scars, we will never heal. And no matter how many student centers we build, no matter how many departments we create, people will not believe in us. People do not trust us. They trust individual people who happen to work at Drexel. They don't trust Drexel as a whole. What do you say to people who say, I don't see race, I see humans? I say, you must not see species. Because if you believe that that's a way to live, then you are actually stunning the growth of people who are different than you. You know, I want you to see race, because that is a very big part of me. I tell everybody I'm a Black man. I don't say I'm a man who happens to be Black. That Black part is very, very important to me. So if you erase it, how dare you? What gives you that right to take away part of who I am because it makes you more comfortable? So you have to actually see race. I'm not saying you have to do things because of race, but you need to see the difference, because the difference is that identity part. And if you snatch away a person's identity, I think that's criminal. Y'all really got me on my pulpit today. What do you think violence against the what do you think about violence against the Asian community is not getting the same attention right now as other violence has? Do we, US and Drexel, forget? Yes, I do think that the Asian community, and I know we're talking about a very large community, but just to generalize, Asian people in general are considered the minority that's allowed to pass, even by their own people a lot of times. And I think that that's even happens when there's issues. So Asian people don't necessarily have a high enough voice to actually show outrage for whatever the reasons are, but we also don't pay Asian people the type of attention that they deserve to be paid. I think that Drexel and the US don't really do that well. I think when COVID hit, we started to be like, oh, wait, we got to actually protect Asian people, as opposed to realizing that we are calling this thing like the Kung Fu flu and things like that are directly going to impact Asian people, whether they're from here or not. So I think the Asian community hasn't been able to have the type of voice that other communities have had. And it could be because the assimilation aspect, people probably felt more comfortable with Asian people as opposed to other people, but that's a very big generalization. And I have one more question. I know we have 5 o'clock, so I'm gonna get to it and I'm gonna stop talking. I have a visual for inequality, equity.
Can I just put it there instead of the chat. I have someone asked about equity and equality, and a little while ago I found a graphic that visualizes this really well. So I'm happy to share if you want.
Gotcha. I'm done. Drops mic.
So actually, if you want to stop sharing for Maurice, are you able to put it up? Are you able to share, Stephanie, from your space? Are you able to make, I don't know if Darren, if she's able to share?
You should be able to.
Okay, then let me share this.
Okay. And while you're pulling that up, I just want to, oh, here it comes. Okay, great.
You see it still?
Yes.
Do you see the pictures moving? I don't know if it's still in the same. Yes. Yeah, okay. So let me go back. So this is unequal access to opportunities. Equality is everybody gets the same resources, but they don't have the same basis. Equity is you fix the inequality, and then justice is fixing the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities.
Oh, so it adds justice at the end. That's awesome. So maybe
That's
you
what
can, maybe you could, if that's a link, maybe you could offer that link in the chat.
Yep,
If that's on a website somewhere. So thank you for
it's
sharing.
on LinkedIn. Yes, I am going to post the.
Awesome. So on behalf of the Board of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I can already tell you, I know this was a phenomenal event, and without hesitation, Maurice Cottman always offers phenomenal events. If you haven't seen on our YouTube, our Drexel YouTube, he also did White Spaces, Black Faces. That's also recorded. I don't know whether we have you for 3 or not. I'm kind of forgetting our conversation. Yes, we do.
Yes,
In
in the spring.
In the spring. So we'll have, so look at your Tuesday topic, the website, and make sure you register for that event again. Like I said, I have, some of those questions were, well, a lot of them were mine. I'm just going to own it. But, you know, I was just want to make sure that we got to some of those different things. But you guys that put up questions aside from the ones that I wanted to make sure I knew Maurice wanted to respond to, probably ran out of time. Those questions were phenomenal. So, you know, thank you for attending. We're not finished this conversation. We're going to have another event. What is the title of that one for the spring? Do we have a title?
Give me a second. I have to look it up.
No worries.
Keep talking. I'll have it in a second.
Okay, no worries. So yeah, so I just want to make sure everyone know, again, if you're not from Drexel CNHP, you know, welcome. Please make sure, I'm a big one on each one, reach one. So if you enjoyed today's session, please make sure you tag someone else and make sure that they register for the next session as well. We had great intent. I think at max, it might've been 28 or 30. So that's awesome. From 4 to 5 on a Tuesday. So I think that's just great. But I think it also speaks that people knew that Maurice was speaking. You know, without hesitation, Maurice, you did it again. It was wonderful. It was comprehensive. It was educational. It was thought-provoking. And we thank you. So here's your round of applause.
And we will see Maurice back here for on Tuesday, May 18th, 4 to 5. The title of that is Meaning Well Isn't Always Doing Well.
There you have it. Another one of those, drop the microphones. All right, so terrific. So I'm sure Maurice can be located via email if anyone really has anything they really want to continue to share with him. But again, thank you. Everyone have a safe and warm evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Darren.